morning and JaiBhim. We are delighted
I think he has to start.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Uh,
Get started.
So, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And JaiBhim, we are delighted to have you all join us for our lecture series today dedicated to honoring the life and legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a visionary leader, a social reformer, a champion of equality and justice. In commemoration of Dr. Ambedkar's invaluable contribution, Boston Study Group have curated a series of lectures that explore various aspects of his life, work, and ideology. Our esteemed speaker today at Ambedkar and hereafter also delves into topics such as caste annihilation, constitutional rights, gender equality, education, economic justice, and Dalit empowerment, shedding light on relevance of Dr. Ambedkar's teaching in today's context. Boston Study Group is a non-profit organization registered with IRS under 501(c)(3 based in New England, USA. We are an Ambedkarite organization dedicated to creating a just and equitable society. We organize study groups, monthly meetings, lecture series, and other social activities in Boston area to support our mission. Our members include individuals, families, students, scholars, academics, and workers who share our vision of equality and upliftment. We focus on creating support structure and working with students from historically marginalized background. We are inspired by figures who have worked for our human welfare from Buddha, Sant Ravidas to Savitribai and Jyotirao Phule, Periyar, and Dr. Ambedkar. Our today's speaker, Dr. Lalit Khandare, is Associate Professor at Pacific University and is going to talk on preserving the socio-psychological ethos of India's independence and constitution. A very warm welcome to you, Lalit Khandare ji.
Thank you.
Dr. Lalit Khandare received his PhD in social work from Indiana University in 2017 and his MA in social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India in 2003. His work focuses on domestic violence, global social work, human rights. He currently teaches research methods and theses, program evaluation, and beyond the cycle of violence in MSW program. So today our speaker guest will be involving us in valuable learning and information for 45 minutes, and then it will be followed by 30 minutes of question and answer session. So with that note, Lalit Khandare ji, please take over.
Yeah. Thank you so much for wonderful introduction, and thank you all the Boston Study Circle group for organizing this lecture series, Dr. Ambedkar's lecture series. And so I will be talking on preserving social psychological ethos of India's independence and constitutional democracy. As we will be celebrating 78th anniversary of India's independence, we may recall a speech by Jawaharlal Nehru that was Trust with Destiny, where he called about all the people in this new country to work together back in 1947, when before that on that night he was appealing the masses who was entering into the new country, independent country, where he called for all the people in the new country to work together to bring freedom and opportunity to common man, to peasants, workers of India, to fight end democracy and ignorance and disease, to build a prosperous, democratic, and progressive nation, and to create social, economic, and political institutions which will ensure justice and fulfillment of life for everyone. He also emphasized, which is very critical at this time in the history, where he said that we all are equally the children of India with equal rights, privileges, and obligations. We cannot encourage.
Lalit Khandare ji, sorry to interrupt. Were you supposed to share your presentation?
Okay. Let me share my screen. Thank you. So, Jawaharlal Nehru also emphasized that we are equally the children of India and who have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. We cannot encourage communalism or narrow-mindedness uh, for no nation can be great whose people are narrow-minded and especially narrow in the thoughts or in the actions. So in this presentation, I'll be talking around, I think, 30 minutes, focusing on relevance of history in current times for this independent India. Constitutional values and goals, national unity, the social revolution, democracy and challenges and solutions. The history of independent India. So around this 15th August coming up, that is 70th anniversary of India's independence. It is interesting to note a critical significance of this time in the history, especially in Oregon. So I want to emphasize this, that we are almost past 100 years of beginning of Gadar Party, which had first meeting in Astoria in Oregon, which had hugely contributed in independence struggle of India. As we entered in the nation, we needed a constitution, a new law, for a new nation to function as a country. On November 26, 1949, after a few years after independence, the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution of India, and it came into effect on January 26, 1950. The independence that we own was after a long fight for freedom from British colonial government. Although 26 November was celebrated as Constitution Day or Law Day every year on the occasion of 125th birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, with renewed interest in around May in 2015, the Union Cabinet in the India announced that November 26 will be observed as Constitution Day to promote constitutional values among its citizens. This is quite important a speech that Dr. Ambedkar had given, and he emphasized with quite great anxiety as he was passing on this greatly built constitution to the Constituent Assembly, the independent India, to function as a new nation or nation. He was guiding this new nation as with this constitution, as he was hoping that it will be a nation building process here forward. And he raised quite important questions in his speech. As we see historically, especially Indian subcontinent has witnessed the foreign invasion, colonial regimes, and many other critical, not only foreign, but also domestic challenges in this region when we were divided based on caste, region, religion, and other divisions. So on November 25th, 1949, he was raising quite critical question, will we be able to preserve our independence? Will we place the country above the creed, or will they place creed above the country? What would happen to her democratic constitution? Will she be able to maintain it, or she will lose it? So we'll try to focus on some of these questions in terms of how we can cultivate or preserve these values and ethos of independence and constitution, which were essentially enshrined in, all the values enshrined in the constitution was efforts to have nation building processes in long term, because it is not immediate, as we were transitioning from British regime to independent India. So when we were establishing constitutional implementing constitution in India, there were specific goals that Dr. Ambedkar, B.R. Ambedkar, has emphasized. So the creation of India as a sovereign independent republic was in a profound sense the commencement of bold experiment in political affairs, as significant as that has been conducted in the history of India or Indian subcontinent. As historic moment of transition of power from British Raj to Indian independent state did not automatically create nation in its spirit and values. It was larger a goal to be realized, and nation making is an ongoing process. The constitutional democracy envisioned the building of trust, of care, inclusion, bonding among its citizens, and getting rid of all the orthodox traditions and ill practices that has caused the division, hatred, and trauma. It is also an opportunity to reimagine a new India where traumatic ruptures could heal the past and make the new possibilities for the future, where each citizen exercise and live with freedom irrespective of their background. India's founding fathers and mothers established constitution both nations' ideals and the institutions and processes for achieving them. The ideals were national unity, integrity, and democratic and equitable society. It was indeed crucial to redress the historic collective wrongs and traumas caused by caste, class, gender, religion, region, languages, and other intersectional vulnerabilities. The leaders of new government and people envisioned a new society was to be achieved through social revolution, pursued with democratic spirit, not with violence, but specifically using constitutional and democratic force. Constitution intended to realize these three goals of unity, social revolution, and democracies. So we'll look into this these three areas. So the first one is national unity and integrity. So we hear a lot about nationalism and patriotism, and especially when certain political ideology or social groups want to organize people against some other certain other groups. However, this national unity and nationalism or integrity is a long-term process where it should be realized through constitutionals, highly centralized federalism, revenue, civil services, and governors. Without holistically addressing the democratic ideal, the national unity may become threat to the democratic ideals. So we have seen it in the past during the emergency. That is one of the examples what happens when there are challenges, or we have seen in current times, not only in India, but many countries where there are glimpses or practices of authoritarian regimes. It has been always contested, and how we can cherish these democratic ideals, but we have to prioritize the national unity and also realize equality, justice, liberty as we prioritize how we can prioritize this nation-making process. So there are multiple aspects that we need to look into. With troubled past, especially a country like India or region like India, we know that those principles and values will take decades or centuries to realize these constitutional institutions. John Rawls talks about setting up just institutions based on the justice as fairness to yield principles of justice. He talks about will of ignorance, and he also emphasized that making the just institutions, it requires people's behavior to comply with entirely with the demands of this proper functioning of these institutions. However, the quality of lives of people are able to live should be the assessment of benchmark in realizing the fair justice. So Dr. Ambedkar and many social and reformers and who led us in this new nation has emphasized what is the benchmark of success of democratic ideals. Or it was highlighted not only during independence but also every time there is election, that where what is the share of person in the last row, so how and where they are, and there are different debates about evaluating that through census or various measures periodically in the country. The national unity and progress lies upon also the justice and dignity of most downtrodden people. So the institution plays critical role in bringing equality and justice for all. If the institution plays in the interest of rulers opposed to the needs of people, the justice will be destined to fail. So the second aspect is around social revolution, and this must be understood quite consciously, how this constitution that Dr. Ambedkar and many others who contributed has focused on bringing social equality, justice, and liberty, and that those ethos of bringing social change is instituted in this constitution. And famous constitutionalist Gavin Austin says that Constitution of India, by itself, very existence was a social revolutionary statement. It was to be modernizing force. Social revolution and social democracy and democracy were to be the strands of seamless web, mostly closely related. It was indeed revolutionary for society to have democratic government representation, representative democracy, persons' liberty and equality before law. Similar to US and other countries, Dr. Ambedkar proposed extensive social security measures to be added in the Constitution. However, they were not adopted in the Constitution. There is extensive lot of guidelines that Dr. Ambedkar had envisioned, and that is mentioned in States and Minority that Dr. Ambedkar wrote. But rather, what has happened around these social security measures, we see those reflected in directive principles of state policies. The social economic equitableness as expressed in directive principles of state policy was equally revolutionary. The fundamental rights are crucial that enlist right to equality, freedom, rights against exploitation, and provision of constitutional remedy. It can be seen as equalizing the past inequities of trauma and violence, and some provisions may also look like just systems for communities who were most impacted by hierarchical caste societies. Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste, she beautifully explains this redistributive justice, or the burden on the people who are white, or in the Indian context, if they are privileged caste, how they can relate to the burden of equitable policies. Because she mentioned about use the metaphor of the house that we own, and all the positive or challenging scenarios that we have to deal with addressing that house. So house is, people have owned that home, or people have legacy of owning what we have created, the mess that we have created. So people from privileged castes where the beneficiary, or in US context, people who were white, who were beneficiaries of the inequal systems. And whatever challenges we incur, they are not all of a sudden, and all the equitable policies that we see through affirmative action policies or reservations or scholarships, those are not all of a sudden. Those are creating equal platform for people who may be coming from starting from different positions in their life. And there was also efforts to abolish jamindari and altering property relations to provide equitable provisions in various spheres of life for being land or education employment. We are deliberating on current judgment on as a community and as a nation on current judgment of subcategorization of caste-based reservation and how that will or benefit or adversely impact the community or nation building formation. Dr. Ambedkar also emphasized on the democratic democracy, and there has been various definitions of democracy. And in the West, from Aristotle and Abraham Lincoln in recent past, but also many others in West. However, Dr. Ambedkar was trying to hope for democratic or social revolution through without violence and through the governance using governance and constitutional means. And the government for the people can be only where the attitude of individuals is democratic. So where Dr. Ambedkar emphasized that each individual should be prepared to treat every other individual as equal and is prepared to give the same liberty which they claim for themselves. So historically, so we have not entered into the new nation as equals. We entered in new nation, new independent India as unequals. They were so this attitude of democratic attitude of mind was expected in the nation building process, and this democratic attitude of mind is a result of socialization of individuals in democratic society. So Dr. Ambedkar emphasized certainly about liberty, equality, justice, freedom. However, he gave core importance to the Maitri or compassion or fraternity. So that is used in French Revolution, the fraternity. However, the holistic meaning or comprehensive meaning that he sees is in Maitri of Buddha, or also he sees some of the quite interesting terms in Indian spiritual traditions. So he says that without fraternity or Maitri, the liberty would destroy equality and equality would destroy liberty. If democracy, if in democracy, liberty does not destroy equality and equality does not destroy liberty, it is because of the basis of both there is fraternity or Maitri. So the fraternity he emphasized as the root of democracy. So looking at some of the other theories or how this governance can take place without looking at individual or community interest versus public interest. Extensively, Dr. Ambedkar cites Edmund Burke in his famous speech. This is a quote and speech by Burke. Parliament is not Congress of ambassadors from different and hostile interests, which interest each must maintain as an agent and advocate against other agent and advocate agents and advocates. But Parliament is a deliberative assembly of one nation with one interest, that of the whole. So where there is no local purpose, not local prejudices, and they should not be local prejudices should not be the guide, but the general good resulting from the general reasons of the whole. So similarly, there are other important quotes by Dworkin. Arguments of policy justify political decisions by showing that the decisions advances or protects some collective goals of community as a whole. Argument of principle justifies a political decision by showing that the decision respect and secure some individual or group right. So it is important to focus on the public interest or public good rather than individual interest and there are specific guidelines, especially like Ambedkar emphasized the role of civil servants. So, and also the parliamentarians or the lawmakers or legislators. So they have ethical values and they need to have integrity and honesty. And also Dr. Ambedkar mentioned about the role of Comptroller and Auditor General of India. And which is, he said that one of the most important position in constitutional framework. And all of these people who are leading the nation through bureaucracy or political representation, they need to have their values and abidance towards the constitution, constitutional values rather than their own ideology or their own class or groups. As we see these challenges, there are certain solutions that we have been discussing as well around the values. And so some of the areas that focus on psychological aspect are cultural trauma, groupism, altruism, moral concepts of justice and caring. And Dr. Ambedkar emphasized on constitutional morality is not natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. So it will not happen all of a sudden. So it may be through education, it may be in social, cultural, public spheres. He said that we must realize that our people have yet to learn those moralities, and because democracy in India is only a top dressing on the Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. This is another quote by James Baldwin, great African-American scholar. We have got to be as clear-headed about human beings as possible because we are still each other's only hope. The cultural trauma occurs when members of collective feel that they have been subjected to horrendous events that leaves indelible mark upon the group consciousness, marked by their memories forever, change their identity in fundamental and irrecoverable way. So it may be because of people's historical experiences of caste-based apartheid or gender-based trauma or other extreme forms of violence, maybe because of religious-based separation from Pakistan, India and Pakistan. So as we entered into this new nation, so we have the collective groups have faced various traumas, and as a nation, how we understand those, and then unless we understand, we cannot find solutions around those. This trauma not only affect the survivor, but also the perpetrators of the violence. So the people across all people in the India are some or other ways are affected by this violence, and it is hurdle in nation making process. On unconscious mind, Carl Jung, a great psychologist, he mentioned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it a fate. So if whatever trauma has happened in the past, if people or group of people feel that it is their destiny or karma, because of that they are born in certain caste, and they have to continue this inhuman occupation for ages, they will say that it is because of fate. But when that unconscious become conscious, or Dr. Ambedkar mentioned that make slave aware about their slavery, they will revolt for their freedom. To raise the consciousness about the unconscious influences the self-trauma at societal level and draws connection between it. It can be a roadmap to live effective resistance for anti-caste or anti-intersectional inequities. It is crucial for civil society to be aware of past and ongoing trauma against most oppressed communities and work with individuals and communities consciously to make aware about their past and work with them to address ongoing traumas and resolve to stop further collective trauma through establishing ideal based on equal relationship and sameness. So some of these principles that we have been seeing here, which are psychological in nature, however, those are enshrined in constitutional values of fundamental rights and directive principles and other spaces that we need to have moral compass for people who are leading the governance of India, to be aware about these historical and contemporary traumas, that their actions are rather mitigating those traumas, not perpetuating those further. The groupism is an extension of egoism. The person in group transfer their own centered perspective to groups centered framework of reference. He, she, they, or interprets events in terms of groups, interest, and beliefs. The holders of institutional post may act differently to protest or demands led by different identities. The negative messaging about their group's actions and generally triggers the stereotypes that helps to mold a biased interpretation of other groups' behavior. The complex nexus of support of constitutional office bearer and community groups from caste or gender-based supremacy background may result in denial of justice to the marginalized communities. We may have seen this in the case of Khairlanji or thousands of other cases where people may be protesting for their rights. However, this nexus of high caste nexus with local law and order could not provide justice to the victim. The ideology of extreme hatred groups are essentially reactionary. They direct towards returning the government to the original ethos of liberty, equality, and patriotism or nationalism. However, the liberty and freedom nationalism voices miss the emphasis on the fraternity or building the interdependent communities. Robin and Post argues that for many of these groups, the mandate of racial or caste purity or purity of supremacist that mandates the clearing out of those alien element in the population like Blacks, Jews, Hispanics, or Native Americans. And in most recent times, we can see the emergence of anti-Asian hatred in the US context, especially after COVID. There were instances of hatred against Sikhs and other South Asian religious groups. Similar examples can be seen in South Asian countries as well, as those nationalist groups emerged without tendering to the social ethos. And as a result, the groupism perpetuate the hatred and cultural trauma. There are two aspects when we talk about altruism: a narcissist expansion or altruistic humanist. So people who are leading or social, cultural, but also this is focusing on the people who are holding constitutional post. Are they do they have narcissist expansion psychology or altruistic humanism? The narcissist expansion focuses on our group is superior, the chosen one, the elite. However, the altruistic humanist focus on how all people are equal and worthwhile. And there are classism or casteism or religious supremacy in narcissist expansion. However, in altruistic humanism, each of the member in irrespective of caste, creed, religion, or region, or language, each of them have equal rights in independent India. And it is also important how narcissist expansive view considered the lives of people as especially the vulnerable and who can be expandable. But however, the lives of all the people are sacred for altruistic humanist. And if I help in group or my class, it makes me better persons, as opposed to altruistic humanist, where if I helped outgrouper, it may makes me a better person. We also have to think about in independent India, as we promised the trust towards all, especially the most downtrodden, but the institution which we instilled this trust as we enter into independent India. So this trust of oneness and the constitutional values and ethos and morality were betrayed as we see the number of atrocities that has been faced by scheduled caste or scheduled tribe and other vulnerable communities. So this is institutional betrayal in that sense. And until and unless this betrayal of by the state or the institution is resolved, there is no scope for further nation building process. So the nationalism is whatever we do without this these efforts to breach this trust is anti-national. So whatever we do to promote the idea of fraternity or compassion is the nationalism in the true sense. The humanistic code, the notion of universality of humankind is the antidote to the rigid prospective characteristics of primitive culture, nationalism, and self-preserving morality. The moral justice focus on protecting separateness of people. Individualistic orientation emphasize the rights and entitlement, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Each of them have equal rights. And also the caring orientation is contrast, assumes connectedness perspective. The moral precepts emanating from this orientation revolves around sensitivity to others and need, responsibility of their welfare, and sacrifices of one's own needs for the needs of the others. When confronted with complex situations, they need to decide whether to assert their rights to express caring and simply pursuing their self-interest. So looking back on the fear and anxiety of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as we were transitioning from British India to independent India, he was worried about if India will remain independent, if we'll be able to preserve the moral ethos of constitution, will be able to contribute as a nation in that nation building process. And he also emphasized the role of intellectual in every country. The intellectual class is the most influential class, and this is the class which can foresee, advise, and lead. In no country does the mass of people live the life of intelligent thought and action. It is largely imitative and follow the intellectual class. It is no exaggeration in saying that the entire destiny of the country depends on their intellectual class. So he was hoping that intellectual class will be honest and independent. It can be trusted to make initiative and give proper lead when crises arise. It is true that the intellectual by itself is no virtue. It is only means, and the use of means depends upon the ends, which on intellectual person pursues. The intellectual person can be good person, but they may easily be rogue. Similarly, an intellectual class may be a band of high-souled persons ready to help, ready to emancipate, airing humanity, or it may easily be gang of crooks or a body of advocate of narrow clique from which it draws its support. So there is this warning by Dr. Ambedkar. If we want to preserve those constitutional values and principle or India's independent democratic nation, we have to use all democratic force to and means with the moral compass of fraternity to bring this change. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Khandare ji. It was a wonderful session, and it was very insightful. So as we proceed with the engaging discussion now, I kindly request everyone to maintain respectfulness towards each other, especially when asking questions. Furthermore, to ensure that everyone has opportunity to participate and that we stay within our allotted time frame, I kindly ask for your cooperation in keeping discussions concise and focused. If the conversation begins to prolong, I may need to ask you to come back on track and move forward to accommodate everyone's time. And so thank you, everybody, for understanding that. With that, we can begin the question and answer round. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hands or comment in the chat box, and I can read out your questions as we proceed. Thank you.
Dipti has a question, Priya.
I can't see her question.
Yeah, no,
Yes,
she
Dipti
raised
has
the
raised
hand.
her hand. Yeah, Dipti, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Deepti, I can't see you raised a hand. Sorry about that. But yeah, please go ahead.
No worries. So Dr. Khandare, thank you so much, for this session. Lot of things I didn't know. So, thank you so much for providing the information. Quick question, and I was always wondering, when they, after the independence, when they put all this thing in the Constitution, why, I mean, I don't know if you have the answer, but why they didn't just remove the caste? Okay, just let's remove this caste barrier or the last surname or something like that, making sure that everyone is equal. There shouldn't be any even the caste system. I'm always I was always thinking of that.
Yes, thank you, Dipti ji, for the question. So yeah, it is quite important to understand what Dr. Ambedkar was envisioning in the new constitution, and we always think that what we have as constitution is the best constitution in the world, that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has envisioned. So he had envisioned quite important and critical changes, and whatever they were trying to bring change, so it was it needed to be accepted by the whole constituent assembly, and Dr. Ambedkar had to for each of the points that they had to bring change, it needed everyone's consensus. So we see that in different language, like Article 15, 16, and many instances, it specifically mentioned that we cannot discriminate based on caste. Everyone is equal irrespective of caste, creed, and others. So Constitution is, as many constitutionalists has expressed, India's Constitution is one of the best Constitution that focuses on bringing social revolution or social change. However, people, whatever best we could have in the constitution, until and unless people who rule or they have that moral compass, it is difficult to bring that change. And also in quite specifically last phase of his life, and also if you read Annihilation of Caste, in the last phase of those segment, he was focusing on the responsibility of the community at large. So there is need of social democracy. So we were actually entering into democracy suddenly after British regime. If you see in US context, people fought for gender rights. They fought for racial equality. So it took decades or long time. But in India, it was to a large extent all of a sudden. So what Dr. Ambedkar was envisioning through this constitution was as this is guiding principles, that social equality in social, like democratic equality in social sphere will happen eventually through this guiding legal principles that will create space for people to, especially most underrepresented, to have equal voice. And then that will lead to better constitutional or legal mechanism in future, maybe down the line after 100 years. But he was envisioning that there will be social consciousness to bring change in next century or so, that will lead to further development or better policies at constitutional level. If that makes sense. But at the end, I think there is also legal, social and religious role that society can play to bring change at social cultural level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have next question? I have one hand. I have a question. What role does education play in preserving the socio-psychological ethos of India's independence among future generation?
Yeah, so yeah, education can be classified into like two different areas. One is like, what is the role of education in the life of people? So I think if there is one word to describe that, just philosophically, Dr. Ambedkar has envisioned the role of education is social change. So at rudimentary level, we see the role of education in getting degrees to have means of employment for self, family support and everything. However, the role of the philosophically Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was quite influenced by John Dewey, who is kind of one of the foremost philosopher in education in the US. And he emphasized how we can cultivate the idea of social affiliation of towards bringing ideal society, how we can cherish those ethos, constitutional ethos or morality. And also, I think before that, one need to, as a community, and we not necessarily focus on people who are vulnerable or people who have been victims. I think there is larger responsibility. What we are talking about is on people who are privileged caste, who are at privileged positions, and how there is cultivation of understanding what were the historic wrong, what is the historic consciousness of communities who were vulnerable, and what is happening with those communities who are impacted across caste, gender, and other vulnerable identities, and how to bring that social educational awareness. And it is so much important in current times as we see the emergence of authoritarian regimes all over the world. So there is a huge need to have social, cultural, maybe more structured education on this in these areas, and until and unless the people will understand those historical realities, uh, how the democratic ideals were there in history of India for that um, reference, and how that went down in the history, how there was fall in the human consciousness in Indian context. And until and unless we know those historical wrongs or rise, and also Dr. Ambedkar's vision was also how we can learn from contemporary and historical the histories of other countries. So, example, in contemporary times, if there were best practices bringing social change, social democratic change in elsewhere, that can be brought in India. So we don't have to, or also learn from example from Bangladesh, what is happening now. If there are, what are the perils of authoritarian or other regimes, what may happen. So we need not have to wait for the worst in Indian context to bring that change. So, but certainly there should be structured social education for young youths. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I understood is history has a significant role in conveying the message of how we can educate people. Thank you so much. Next we have Sanjay ji, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Lalit, for very intuitive presentation. And I like the efforts you put in the presentations, very gem of informations I've seen. So thank you very much for doing this one. I have two questions. So one is, we have all seen that in India, the last 10, 15 years, and I believe before that also, the way the right wing basically getting advancement and ruling in last 10 years and now continuing also in this regime. The same thing is happening in the European countries too. Many of the countries are basically moving towards the right wing. Same thing in USA, the second largest democracy in the world. But if we look at the demographics of the people who are basically leaning towards the Republican Party, which is basically, or more than that, towards the Trump who wants to be a dictator, correct? So what is the reason of means the people leaning toward this particular mentality, and they think that the democracy is not good enough for them? So that is the one question. And the second is whether the recent elections results in our India shows that the democracy in India is matured enough to sustain the advance of the right-wing extremism, or it is not.
Okay, so I'll start with the first one, and if I forget the second one, maybe you can type in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you can go with the first one.
Yeah, so yeah, we have seen what is happening in the US and other countries, the rise of extremism. And we have seen this recent news about UK also, how people have been terrorized, and there is violence against the communities who may not look like them. So so we have to look at this phenomena not in isolation, like what is happening in India. Certainly, we have to look into the causes of what has been happening in Indian context. But globally, what we have seen, the trends, especially if you go in recent past history of World War after First World War or after Second World War, what was happening. So example, post 1930s, there was Great Depression in the US context. So there was the emergence of a need for, on the one hand, there was great crisis, but also it created some opportunities for emergence of social security in the US context. Similarly, we see the period where we have seen extreme form of violence against Jews in Europe, starting in Europe, in Germany and other countries. And so this two, one may be progressive ideologies or regressive ideologies, or where people think that certain groups are superior. Example, what is enshrined in Manusmriti, or what Nietzsche's call as the idea of Superman that Hitler cherished. So those two kind of ideologies we have seen emerged over different times in the history. In particular time in the history, there were support for certain ideologies, not only in one country, but also other countries supporting those same ideologies. So we can see the similar contemporary situation in current times. So, and also Dr. Ambedkar wrote quite classic work on kind of rise and fall of democratic ideals, or revolution and anti-revolution in Indian context. So we have to see those are not permanent. So those are, like, according to Buddhist ideology, it is impermanent. So, but that creates an opportunity for bringing change for betterment in future. So that is the first answer. And we have, so the second one, I thought you asked about Indian context, looking at what is happening in India.
Yeah, I put the question there, Lalit, in the chat box.
Yeah, this recent election, the recent election shows that democracy in India is matured enough to sustain advances of right-wing extremism. Yeah, we can maybe pose this question as the recent election in India gives us some hope of nation building, continued nation building process, or we as a nation want to go in other direction of where we have seen post independent countries, especially post 1950s, we have seen many countries who got independent lost their independence. So especially across the world, I think we as Indians, we almost, I think, in, I think, 8 billion population, we are 1.25 billion. With so much diversity based on caste, religion, states, and so much different, so many identities we have. And within that, we Dr. Ambedkar focused on how we can preserve this country as a nation. So that was his first anxiety and fear. Will people retain its independence? Will people value community well-being over their own creed, or their own caste, or their own ideology? So what we have seen in last decade or so, or for that matter, post-independence, there is always thrust of how to protect and preserve the rights of most vulnerable. And interestingly, in India, the most vulnerable is not the minority, example, in the US context. So they are the majority. So if in the nation making process, if the majority of the people who are farmers, if they are fighting for their rights as farmers, if they are fighting for affirmation or representation in equal representation in education or employment, if they are fighting for basic sustenance of livelihood, basic dignity, and rather than going towards, because what we have seen post-independence, it is not ideal India or ideal democracy. What we have envisioned that next 50 or 100 years will create a platform or institutions that will create pace for beginning of new democracy. However, what we have seen after this 75, after 78 77 years of India's independence, we, rather than creating that platform for nation building, we are creating environments that may divide or dismantle these nations. And because that was a fear, the first fear was independence of India. It means that will all the states in India will remain with India. Example, that is one of the example. Or people who are from in the states which are in bordering state, example with China or Bangladesh or Pakistan or other countries or other regions that are with the ocean or the territories, that we are always faced with the threats, and that and we also have to see what is happening globally will also have impact locally. So as a nation, we have not come, I think even people who are in the RSS or extreme right wing, even if they have ideas of nation building or nationalism in true sense, even if for small percent, they need to think about, for that one need to have ideal institutions in place. And with the current elections, I think it is important how, especially this is interesting, what and contrast to what Dr. Ambedkar was saying, the role of intellectuals. I think Dr. Ambedkar was hoping that this change will happen from the intellectual. However, the election interestingly show the underclass or the people who are most downtrodden masses have shown. It is interesting election analysis how they have created this kind of holistic balance in the democratic elective processes, how they have used their franchisee as effective means to restrain the authoritarian practices that is not good for anyone in India. There are other questions in the chat.
Yeah. So the question has been asked by Rin. How does one reconcile the evolutionary potential of Constitution Ambedkar's ideals with the fact that India has been colonizing Kashmir since its inception? How do we throw out the parts of Constitution which justify casteism, colonization, etc.?
Okay.
Or she also continues, or I guess I like an argument that I hear all the time from liberal Sarvanas is India's democracy isn't perfect, but it's better than Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. How do we encounter that narrative and ensure the constitution fulfills its potential?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this question, Rin. Yeah, we as a nation, certainly we have come long way from colonial regime. Certainly we cannot reproduce those colonial ideas or bring all of a sudden like big changes that may dismantling communities that are affected by different regional conflict, or for that matter, within India, we can say that Dr. Ambedkar was always quite interestingly tried to emphasize that scheduled caste as who faced untouchability are refugees in these independent nations. So he was trying to argue for various means to rehabilitate those refugees, example, through separate settlements or separate electorates, or how they can be integral part of this nation. So similarly, if people, because of their religious background, because of if someone is from Muslim community, not only in Kashmir, but also nationally, there is huge sense of fear and disentitlement or lack of representation. So when we talk about building community or nation, we have to think about India as nation, irrespective of particular religion. And interestingly, in states and minorities, if I remember correctly, Dr. Ambedkar has mentioned that we have to specifically mention in the fundamental rights of India that we are not one religious, the state cannot have specific religion. So that was very interesting insight or foresight that Dr. Ambedkar has seen what we see in current India. And certainly, I think the second thought on Savarnas, always comparing India's democracy with other countries. I think for that, we have to go in, maybe we can use certain benchmarks or of progress, maybe economic or social and other progress, what other countries have achieved. So in terms of transparency or freedom of expression or poverty, on various indicators globally, many times India is far behind even some of the African countries or other South Asian countries. So what we are, and this is specific to, I think, when I hear the news and discussions around what is happening in Maharashtra nowadays, they are saying Maharashtra example is kind of once cherished as role model for social democracy and social change is worst. And ironically, they compare it with some of the feudal states in northern India, and they say it is worse than those states. So what we are envisioning, I think people, because of lack of information, lack of this transparent media and dominant propagation of certain views through social media, people may get feeds which they may like rather than what is happening at the ground level. But thank you so much for this question. I hope I was able to answer those questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for asking questions, and Khandare ji, thank you for answering all the questions so patiently. So I think we are almost out of questions now. I don't see any hands raised or any questions asked in the chat box. So Rin says, thank you so much for your answer. So then I think we can conclude for today's session. But before we end, I would like to announce that we have Awakened digital magazine. And this is the Awakened is a Boston study group digital magazine that provides platform for all Ambedkarites in diaspora to share their stories, thoughts, views, and talents to enhance the Ambedkarite movement. We are looking forward to literally contributions for our future issues from Ambedkarites across the globe including our young Ambedkarites. So if you need further information, or you want to contribute anything that your skills, you can visit our website, www.bostonstudygroup.org, or email us at contact@bostonstudygroup.com. And on behalf of our group, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for all the participants today, and your presence contributed immensely to our success of event. And if you have any questions further, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, our email ID is contact@bostonstudygroup.com. And once again, thank you for participation and your support. We look forward to welcoming you for our future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.